The wind had already swallowed the road by the time we reached the cabin. Snow drifted in slow, heavy sheets, turning the mountains into vague dark shapes against a flat, gray sky. It was supposed to be our reset weekend. No deadlines, no phones, just 3 days of peace before real life came crashing back in. Instead, the place felt like the start of a bad dream. The cabin sat alone at the edge of a pine forest, its roof bowed under fresh snow. A single yellow bulb glowed over the porch, cutting a circle of color out of the blue-white dusk. In the middle of that circle sat an old man in a wooden chair, bundled in a thick brown coat buttoned up to his throat. "You must be the city couple," he said as we climbed out of the car. His voice was rough and flat, like he'd used up every emotion years ago. "I'm Harlan. I look after the property." Mark stuck his hand out. "Thanks for waiting for us." The roads were a mess. Harlan didn't take his hand. He just nodded once and levered himself up from the chair with a stiff grunt. Up close, he looked even older, skin thin and pale, eyes washed out gray, as if the snow had been rubbing color off him for decades. "Keys are on the table," he said. "Heat's on. Pipes act up, but they'll run. Come on, I'll show your husband the breaker box." He jerked his head toward the door. Mark gave me a little shrug and followed him inside, their boots thumping against the wooden floor. I stayed out on the porch for a moment, letting the cold air bite my cheeks. The forest pressed in on 3 sides of the clearing, the trees tall and dark and crowded, their branches heavy with snow. The quiet up there wasn't like city quiet, it was the kind that rang in your ears, so thick you could hear your own heartbeat. That's when I saw him. A small figure stood at the tree line, maybe 15 meters away, just beyond the spill of porch light. A boy. 10, 11 at most. He wore a thin jacket that didn't look warm enough for late autumn, let alone this storm. No hat, no gloves. His hair fell into his eyes, dark and messy, and his skin looked almost the same color as the snow around him. He didn't move. He just stared at me. For a second I thought I was imagining him. I blinked, and he was still there. I raised my hand in a hesitant wave. He lifted his arms slowly and waved back. A little relief washed through me. Maybe he was a neighbor's kid. Maybe his family rented the cabin after us. I was about to step off the porch and ask if he was okay when a voice snapped behind me. "Hey!" I jumped hard enough that my keys clattered out of my hand. Harlan stood in the doorway, his lined face twisted in a way I hadn't seen before. His eyes weren't washed out now. They were sharp and strangely bright, locked on the boy at the edge of the trees. "You," he barked, his voice cutting through the quiet like a whip. "I told you to stay away from here." The boy flinched. For a split second, fear flashed across his face, so clear it made my stomach twist. Then he turned and bolted into the trees, snow kicking up behind his boots. In 2 heartbeats, the forest swallowed him. "What was that about?" I asked, my voice smaller than I meant it to be. Harlan's jaw worked for a moment, like he was grinding his teeth. "Kid from down the valley," he muttered. "Runs wild in the woods. Breaks into the cellar, steals food, messes with the pipes. You see him again. You don't let him inside. You lock the doors. Understand?" There was something in the way he said it that made the hair rise on my arms. Not just irritation. Something harder. I'd heard that tone before, from teachers who enjoyed humiliation a little too much, from bosses who smiled when they said they cared. Power wrapped in concern. "He looked freezing," I said. "Does he have parents?" "Not my problem," Harlan snapped. Then his face smoothed over as if he'd pulled down a curtain. "You two are tired. Get some rest. Weather'll get worse before it gets better." He shuffled past me, down the steps to his truck, never looking back. The engine coughed to life, headlights cutting twin scars through the falling snow. A moment later, he was gone, swallowed by the trees and the storm. Inside, the cabin was small but neat. Mark had already dropped our bags by the couch and was fiddling with the thermostat. A pot of soup simmered on the stove. Harlan must have left it for us. The warmth seeped slowly into my fingers as I shrugged off my coat, but the image of the boy stayed stuck behind my eyes. "What did he want?" Mark asked. "He said he's some kind of thief," I replied, peeking through the front window. The forest stared back, still and dark. But he didn't look like a thief. He looked scared. That night, we tried to pretend everything was normal. We ate soup, argued over what movie to download before the Wi-Fi gave up, and laughed about how quiet it was. Yet every time the wind pushed against the walls or a branch scraped the roof, I found myself glancing at the door, half expecting a small fist to knock. It was close to 9 when I wandered back to the window with my mug. The snow had thickened, turning the world into a soft, blue blur. At first, I thought the shape by the tree line was just another shadow. Then it moved. The boy was back, standing in the exact same spot as before, arms wrapped around his chest. Even through the distorted glass, I could see that his mouth was moving, like he was trying to say something, but the storm swallowed his words. "Mark," I whispered. "He's outside again." The crying outside. Before Mark could answer, a faint sound drifted through the wooden walls. A soft, high-pitched whimper. Not the wind. Not the pipes. A child sobbing. And it wasn't coming from one place. It circled the cabin. Soft at first. Then closer. Then suddenly distant. Like someone walking slowly around our walls, crying as they went. The hairs rose on the back of my neck. Mark grabbed a flashlight. "Stay here," he whispered. "No, Mark, wait." But he was already at the door, boots crunching onto the porch. I watched through the window as he swept the beam across the yard. The light bounced off the pines, off the snow, off the old steps. But the boy was gone. "Do you hear that?" Mark shouted through the storm. The sobbing had stopped. Suddenly, Mark's voice echoed from somewhere else entirely. "Down here." My heart lurched. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from below. The basement. I grabbed the lantern and rushed down the narrow steps, my breath forming clouds in the cold, damp air. Mark stood halfway inside the basement room, pointing the flashlight toward the back corner. And there he was. The boy. Huddled on the floor behind old crates, soaked, shivering, dirt smeared across his cheeks like ash. His feet were bare, and his thin jacket clung to his small frame as if frozen onto him. He wasn't crying now. He was trying not to breathe too loudly. "Hey," Mark said softly, kneeling. "We're not angry. Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head violently. This close, he looked even younger, maybe 8. His lips were cracked and blue. But what struck me most was the fear in his eyes. Not fear of us. Fear of being found. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe here." At those words, the boy's face twisted, like he wanted to believe me, but couldn't. He crawled forward and grabbed Mark's pant leg with trembling fingers. "Please," he whispered. "Please don't tell him I came here." "Tell who?" Mark asked. The boy swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "Mr. Harlow." A chill rolled through me. He hurts us," the boy stammered. "He hurts my sister more." "Your sister?" I echoed. The boy nodded, tears filling his eyes. "He locked her in a room down here. She's been there for days. He said she stole food. Please help her." Mark and I exchanged a look. Fear, disbelief, fury all tangled into one. "Show us," Mark said. The boy crawled toward the far corner where the basement walls narrowed. Behind broken boxes and rotting shelves was a small, blocked-off corridor we hadn't noticed before. He slipped through and we followed. The air changed instantly. Damp. Rotten. Stale. The deeper we went, the heavier it felt, like the walls were closing inward. Then the boy stopped at a tiny storage alcove. And my breath caught. A little girl, barely 7, lay curled on the floor beneath a filthy blanket. Her skin was ghost pale, her lips cracked. Bruises dotted her arms and neck. Her hair was matted to her forehead with sweat. She was barely awake. "Oh my God," I gasped, dropping to my knees. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. A dry whisper escaped her. "Cold." I wrapped her in my coat and pulled her gently into my arms. She was weightless, bones under a thin layer of skin. "He didn't come back for her," the boy whispered. "No food. No water. 2 days." Mark was already dialing 911, his fingers shaking. This is an emergency. Child endangerment. Maybe worse. Please, send help to Ridge Pine Cabin near Trail 6. Hurry, please hurry. He stayed on the line, voice trembling, trying to steady the panic rising within us. Minutes dragged by like hours. I stroked the girl's hair as she murmured nonsense, half words, half dreams. The boy sat beside her, clutching her hand, his shoulders shaking. Is he coming back? He asked suddenly. Who? I whispered. But I already knew. The boy looked toward the stairs. Harlow. The storm outside rumbled. The wind slammed against the cabin. Snow hissed across the windows. And then, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming from the porch above us. Mark and I locked eyes, fear slamming into my chest like a fist. The boy's voice broke into a terrified whisper. He followed me. And upstairs, the front door creaked open. The truth beneath the snow. The front door groaned open with a long, dragging sound that froze all three of us in place. Mark instinctively shut off the flashlight, plunging the basement corridor into a soft, trembling darkness lit only by the lantern I held. The boy grabbed his sister and pressed himself into the wall, eyes huge and terrified. He always comes without talking, the boy whispered. He listens first. Upstairs, slow footsteps moved across the wooden floorboards, methodical, unhurried, like whoever was inside expected the house to answer back. Mark gently pulled me and the kids behind the stack of crates. Stay behind me, he mouthed. The cabin groaned as someone walked closer to the basement door. A hand brushed the doorknob. It rattled gently, not forceful, just testing. Almost like he wanted to see if we'd respond. Mark squeezed my wrist. Do not move. The knob turned a quarter inch. Stopped. Turned back. Silence filled every corner of the house. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Then, a knock. Soft. Polite. Deliberate. 3 taps. Mark, I whispered. He shook his head sharply. Don't answer. The boy pressed his forehead to his little sister's, whispering words I couldn't hear. She blinked weakly, clinging to his sleeve. From upstairs, a voice drifted down low, strained, almost practiced. I know you're down there. The basement lights flickered. Something, wind or something heavier, pressed against the outer wall of the cabin, making the wood creak and shift. Mark swallowed hard. The police are coming, he whispered. We just need to stay hidden. But the voice upstairs spoke again, this time closer to the stairs. Come out. You're making this harder. Something about the tone felt wrong, not angry, not loud, but controlled. Like someone who'd rehearsed these lines before. Like someone who expected obedience. The basement door hinge squealed. The door opened an inch. A cold draft slid down the steps. Stay behind me, Mark whispered, stepping forward. I clutched the lantern tighter, trying not to breathe too loudly. The boy and girl pressed together, trembling. A shadow moved at the top of the steps. Then voices. Multiple voices. Police. Flashlights. Radios crackling. County Sheriff's Department. Announce yourself. I gasped with relief as heavy footsteps filled the cabin above us. The basement door slammed open fully, and beams of light cut through the darkness. 2 officers appeared at the bottom of the stairs. You the callers? One asked. Mark nodded so fast it almost looked like a shake. They guided us upstairs and wrapped blankets around the kids. Snow whipped into the open doorway, but Harlow was nowhere in sight. Only his truck sat half buried in the storm. 4 officers searched the woods around the cabin, while the rest questioned us. The boy told them about the chores, the food, the threats, his sister's confinement. The officers looked disturbed, but kept their voices calm, gentle. Within minutes, more cruisers arrived. But Harlow was gone. The officers searched the valley for hours, following his footprints as far as the tree line. They led deeper into the forest, then simply stopped, vanished. By sunrise, the kids were taken to the hospital. We followed in our car, exhausted, shaken, but unwilling to leave them alone. Doctors checked them both thoroughly. Aside from cold exposure and hunger, they were stable. When the sister finally opened her eyes fully and smiled, something in my chest loosened. The boy gripped my hand like he was anchoring himself to the world again. Later that morning, the sheriff came to talk. "We've dealt with Harlow before," he said quietly. "Complaints, strange behavior, nothing we could hold him for. He always stayed just on the edge of the law." "And now?" Mark asked. The sheriff shook his head. "We'll find him. People don't just disappear." But I could see doubt flicker in his eyes. The storm had wiped away too much. When we left the hospital, the boy tugged at my coat. "Are you coming back?" he asked softly. His sister peeked out from behind him, clutching her blanket. Mark and I exchanged a look, a quiet understanding passing between us. Something had changed. Something had grown. "Not coming back," I said gently. "Taking you forward." The boy blinked. "We're starting the paperwork tomorrow," Mark added with a soft smile. "If you want us to." The boy threw his arms around Mark's waist. His sister wrapped herself around my leg. For the first time since the cabin, since the snow, since the fear, I felt warm. As we walked out into the winter morning, I glanced back one last time. The hospital windows reflected the pale sun, but for a moment, the glass shimmered with something else. A shape in the distance, a silhouette in the snow. Watching. Then it vanished behind the drifting white. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just my mind replaying the fear. But deep down, I knew. The mountains don't give up their monsters easily. And somewhere out there, Harlow was still walking.